Hey, everybody, welcome to the Crit House. I'm Jeff Larson. Our MyFIVE series continues with David duChemin, who is coming to us from Vancouver Island on the west coast of this continent. David, thanks for joining us here on the Crit House. It's nice to have you.
Absolutely, my pleasure, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who do not know, David is a world and humanitarian assignment photographer. He is a best-selling author, a publisher, podcaster, and also a former comedian, and he leads workshops internationally. Today, we will discuss David's MyFIVE images and projects, including T.H. White, Steve McCurry, John Roskilly, the company Patagonia, and Paul Nicklin. David, it is again a pleasure to have you on the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
You have dozens of books. You are a prolific author and publisher.
It's the downside of having no social life. But yeah, I mean, a lot of photographers just do photography, and I have always loved writing. I don't consider myself a writer secondarily. In fact, I think my legacy, if I'm to have one, will probably be more my words than my photographs. But yeah, I love writing and I love teaching. The craft of photography has been something that has occupied it's distracted me for most of my life. So I have a lot to say about it.
Well, how do you describe yourself as a photographer? I mean, aside from what you just said about being a writer and all those other things we talked about, as a photographer, how do you think of yourself as an artist? How do you talk about yourself that way?
Hesitantly. I struggle, Jeff, because every photographer, every artist every human being is sort of, on a path of evolution to the person that they are becoming. And so, you introduced me as a world and humanitarian photographer, and that at one time was entirely true, 100%. But I've drifted away, especially over COVID. I've drifted away from photographing humans and culture. And years ago, not that many, but a number of years ago, I had an accident that prevented me from doing assignment work. And so I've increasingly been focusing my lens on the natural world and things that evoke awe and wonder in me. I'm less interested in going off to India and photographing culture, and more interested in getting under the waves with a humpback whale or sitting on a shore with a bear. So I'm focusing more on the natural world now, but all of it is stuff that everything I think that the photographs that are important to me have been photographs of encounter, whether I'm an encounter with otherness, whether it's other species, other cultures, other places. It's the encounter that matters to me. I don't want to be an objective photojournalist who's, objective in quotes. I don't want to be fly on the wall. I want to be right involved. I want to be a part of it. So I don't know that that's much of a description, but
it is.
I am driven by curiosity and by the desire to experience wonder and awe. And my camera just happens to be a really great way to kind of pry those windows and doors open.
So you have been given the task of choosing 5, sometimes images, sometimes bodies of work, sometimes creative pieces of art that we'll be talking about. What did you go through in making that decision about what those 5 pieces of art were going to be?
Well, here's where it was really interesting for me, and it started with doing my homework, and I watched your conversation with Sam Abel, who I adore, and
Love Sam.
his first image was design and graphics at the beginning of, I think, of Wind in the Willows.
Yeah.
And so I thought, you know what, that's it for me. It's not, we think of images as, photographs.
Yes.
But the moment it goes through our eyes and into our brain, it becomes an image mentally. And I think music can do that for us. And certainly words can do that. I mean, as a writer, I have been so tremendously impacted by the things that I've read. I'm a voracious reader. And when I was 10 years old, my mother gave me the book that we'll talk about in a moment. And it was the images. I don't remember the words. I remember the images that reading those words, put in my brain. And For me, like the human imagination is just astonishing. It's why everyone sees the movie version of a book and says, well, it's not as good as the book. Well, of course not. The book relied on your imagination.
Yeah.
And I don't care how good your director is, how great the writing is, how great the special effects are. Hollywood cannot compete with the power of your imagination. And so for me, the five, some of them, yes, were images in the sense of photographs, but others were images in the sense of, whatever they become when they're rattling around in your brain.
Let's take a look at your five images. So you referred to a book, and that
It
is
did.
what is your first? We'll call it image, but it's a body of work. It's a piece of art from T.H. White, the once and future
Yeah, it's
king.
and it's so my mother, the inscription on this is a happy 10th birthday, love you, mom.
Oh,
And I read the once and future king. I can't even tell you how many times that I've still got it, and it's battered and pages are falling out. Um, Once and Future King is the story of Arthur. So we meet Arthur as a young orphan. His friends call him Wart. I'm not sure friends is the right word for it, but he's picked on. He's an underdog, and he is taken in by Merlin, who in this version lives backwards in history, and takes the eventual King Arthur under his wing and teaches him. And he makes him an ant because Merlin can do whatever he likes, I suppose. And he makes Arthur an ant. And the future King Arthur learns what it's like to create and live in society and in community. And he makes him into a goose, and he basically turns him into a bunch of creatures. And eventually, he becomes King Arthur. And it's the book really focuses on the becoming of who this man will be. And I still, I mean, it's the images. I don't really remember the words, but the images that this book conjured in me about about things like chivalry and all the things, but also about the wild world, the animal world, the natural world. When T.H. White is writing about this stuff, it becomes alive, and it takes on a significance that really impacted me. And so the desire to do good with whatever I do, including my photography, the desire to make a difference in the world, I trace back to the images of from the Once and Future King, and the experience specifically between Merlin and a young King Arthur. And so for me, the picture that was painted by the words in this book were truly significant.
Your second image goes a different direction from number one, with Steve McCurry in this iconic photograph.
Yeah, so this was shot much later. I could have found a picture of the National Geographic cover, but as you'll see in the next one, I've already done that. But this is Sharbat Gula, and most photographers are familiar with the story, even if not the story, the image. And I had at a certain point, the boy becomes the man, and all the posters of Van Halen and rock bands and stuff came off my walls, and I became a teenager. And mostly it was covers, and I feel badly now because I just tore them straight off these beautiful National Geographic magazines. But I cut them very carefully, but I put them on my wall, and there were a couple that were very significant for me, and I will never forget. As many photographers probably go back and credit the experience of seeing this image as something very haunting. For me, it was about the power of what a photograph could do. I had just picked up a camera at the time. It wasn't a new issue of the magazine, as far as I know. It was just an old one. But when I was 14, I picked up a camera, and photography kind of made sense in a way that music didn't, and my efforts at drawing were not particularly successful. But I knew I was a creative. I was definitely not an athlete. And this image, there was a power to it. I don't know if I'd go so far as to that idea of punctum, but there was something about this image that I just and it haunted me. And as I said, I grew up traveling in sort of one of life's great it's not an irony, but coincidences. My last name, duChemin, means of the road in French.
Yeah.
So I was pretty much born to be a traveler. And this photograph beckoned to me of a place that was not my own, of people that were different than me, of otherness. Of course, I couldn't have said that at 14 or 15 years old, but to grow up looking at pictures of others and to not see them as, I mean, different, yes, but not less than. So in many ways, this is what led me eventually to a career in humanitarian photography, was this idea of dignity and humanity. And that something so difficult, I mean, the circumstances out of which Sharbat Gula came were challenging in the extreme, and yet the photograph itself was truly beautiful. And so I think there was something in this image that I've never been able to shake in terms of, and it's not just beautiful because of the subject. We're very easily seduced by the subject matter, but the composition is beautiful, the color harmony is beautiful. There is something as art in this moment and this particular frame, and for whatever reason, it clicked with me at 14, and I look back and I'm like, there is a clear, path from that photograph to the person that I've become, and I will always be indebted to Steve McCurry for making this photograph.
Well, it certainly speaks to the power of photography and how it can have an impact beyond just the snap of 125th of a second.
It was very aspirational. It was like, I want to do one day, I want to do something that has that kind of power.
Yeah.
And I think aspirational images, they're so important. Who and what do you want to become?
Speaking of which, this one from John.
Speaking of
is it Ross Kelly? Is that how it's pronounced? Do you know? Is it or is it Ross Kelly?
Honestly, I don't know. In my mind,
Okay.
I pronounce it Ross Kelly. But again, I with apologies to John Ross Kelly, this was entirely about the photograph, not about the story, not about. It was just, I saw this. It was a story about Americans climbing K2, and I saw it, and I went. Going back to this idea of aspirational, I went, that I want to do that. There's this great movie, The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, the remake. It's about this guy who's always dreaming, and I just, for whatever reason, and the tragedy of the whole Walter Mitty story, at least originally, is he kind of never does the things about which he dreams. In the remake, he ends up through circumstance and force majeure to kind of end up having to live these extraordinary experiences. And I just, there's that quality in that movie, and for me, this picture, when there's in that movie, they have the motto of life, and I couldn't quote it for you, but it's to go to different places, things difficult to arrive at, and to see beyond walls and live these rich experiences. And there was something about this photograph that I went, that's what I want. I don't want the picket fence. I don't want the safe life. I want a life of adventure, of travel, of seeing these things, what I was looking at here, through my own eyes. I truly believe that many people will get to the end and have regrets of the things they did not do, being more intentional about the things that they wanted to accomplish. So, and that's, I mean, unfortunately, this is the note that's hit on this is kind of repeated on the next image. And if I can, just jump ahead to that one.
Sure, let's go.
This is just I really wanted to find the image, because there is an image from the Patagonia catalog back in the mid to late 1980s with a guy wearing a really shabby old Patagonia jacket, and he's underneath a Volkswagen repairing something. And the next page, they're driving toward the Andes. And what the Patagonia catalog did for me as a young man was gave me kind of a variety of dreams to attach this sense of adventure to, and some wonderful photography as well. It's for me, it was both. It was that I could go off on these adventures with my cameras, and unfortunately, I don't have. It would cost hundreds of dollars to replace these old vintage catalogs, but they had wonderful photographs in them. And the Patagonia Journal has become so much more than a catalog, and really hard to get in Canada. But the photographs were just people out there having these adventures. And yes, they happen to all be wearing Patagonia clothing, but that was irrelevant. And it was significant to me as a young adult who was kind of, again, figuring out what I want to do with my life. There still were no like bodies of. I wasn't studying the masters. I wasn't looking at bodies of work. I was very opportunistic as a photographer. I was looking at my stuff and going, well, that's pretty good. I was very, very young, and I was figuring out the darkroom. But the places that I wanted to take my camera to, the kinds of things that I wanted to put my camera in front of, those were much more significant. And so the years of getting the Patagonia catalog, even when I was so poor, I couldn't possibly have afforded a single piece of their clothing, not at all relevant. It was this spirit of adventure and this kind of embracing the wildness of it that was really important. And again, the mental images that it put in my head, and all these dreams and aspirations, so that later when I had opportunities, do you go, when you get to a fork in the road, take it, right?
Right.
But do you go this way or this way? For me, it was always you go in the direction of the adventure, you go in the direction of the uncertainty and the kind of the thing with the kind of rough edges. Much more interested in that than I was in all the other things that were being presented as a young person. So
well, I think that's a good
to think for that.
Yeah, and I was not familiar with this catalog, so I'm going to have a fun diving down and looking at more images from that. But that's a good segue into your fifth and final image.
Yeah. So Paul Nicklin, what do I say about Paul? Paul has become like family to me. He's a very good friend. He and his partner Christina Mittermeier live when they are home about 5 minutes down the road from me here in Nanu's Bay, British Columbia. And but before Paul became a very close friend, he was just an absolute hero to me, on level with Steve McCurry and Sam Abel. And because Paul has an ability to get past all of the nonsense and the BS and just pick up his camera and go photograph things that matter. And he has a work ethic like nobody I know. And so this is in part the photograph. This is a photograph from a larger series that was part of a story in National Geographic about sea leopards.
Mm-hmm.
And this sea leopard and they're very big, and they're known as predators. They are predators, but they're known as dangerous, and they have a real bad rap. And Paul wanted to kind of confront that reputation. And so he got into the water with these sea leopards. And he had this encounter where the sea leopard keeps bringing him increasingly dead penguins. He first brought one and released, and there's a TED Talk. If you have not seen the TED Talk that Paul Nicklin gives, you've got to look it up. It's fantastic. And I will not do justice to it, but
we'll see if we can link to it at the end here.
Yeah, it's you must, because the way he tells the story. I mean, I get tears in my eyes, and I've seen this thing dozens of times. This sea leopard keeps bringing him these increasingly dead penguins, thinking this guy is the worst sea lion in the water because he can't even catch his own penguins. And it's this, again, it comes back to this idea of encounters. And when I look at the work that Paul does, and I listen to his stories, and we have a drink together, and he tells me stories of his latest thing, and I'm so captivated by his priorities, by his ethics, by his and it's aspirational for me. It's what I believe, that I'm doing in my own particular way, although not at the same caliber. But I remember seeing this image years ago, before I was doing the photography I'm doing now, and saying, that's what I want. I want to use wide angle lenses close up, but it was the feeling. This photograph to me would probably lose every photo contest it entered. The judges would have all kinds of things to say about how this wasn't sharp and how this wasn't framed right.
Cut off the eye.
Exactly. But to me, it's so visceral. It's right there, and I can feel And I think as photographers, well, I don't want to go that abstract. As a photographer, that's what I want in my photography. I want people to say, I feel like I'm there. I just remember seeing this photograph and going, like just getting this hint of what it could be like. Oh, that's how you use a wide angle lens. That's how you photograph an encounter and make it be a photograph about that encounter
Yeah.
rather than merely a document of record. My own images from encounters like this, not quite like this, but they allow me to relive and re-experience these moments of wonder in my life. These will be the things that I look at when I'm on my deathbed, or when I'm old and I can't do these things anymore and I'm reliving the magic. That's what I'm really interested in. And I think the through line through all of these images is the experience, is the encounter with myself and a world that has so much
Yeah.
wonder in it, so much to teach me, so many experiences to learn from, and piggyback on to whatever that next thing is.
Well, David, I tell you, such a great way of explaining all of the images and talking about yourself. Love to hear it. So hearing you talk about this kind of sort of, adventure photography, for lack of a better word, I think you phrased it better, is a really eye-opening way for me to see photography and to think about like the feeling of it, as opposed to the way I shoot, which is, light and form and geometry. And it doesn't, there's my photography, there's like almost no feeling to it at all. It's like dead in a really, that's, I'm okay. I like my photography, but there's like the emotional element is limited. And that's probably, when I'm telling my story, that's probably what I need to like wrestle with as an artist and as a photographer, is trying to figure out how to have that emotion to it. Because of the smart, renowned, talented people that I speak with on here, so many of them are talking about that emotion and how it's so important to them as a photographer to have that be part of their work.
It is, but at the same time, there are people, and this is true of any art form, and including writing, that there are people that are much more emotional and, frankly, would not do well on the cerebral side of things, and vice versa. And I think the beauty of art is that we're not looking for consensus. We're not looking for, God help us, homogeny. There are people operating in every discipline with different priorities and focuses, and together, I think to be able to access all of that, I think is a wonderful thing. And I think it's important that, that I not try to become you and you not try to become me, or see the fact that your work isn't like mine as a deficit. It's not deficient. It's just you. And that is the most important thing. I'm not interested in, is this photograph good? I'm interested in, is this photograph mine? Like, is it truly mine? That's a more important, but then again, that's a less cerebral question and a much more, emotional question. And I clearly I'm a much more emotional person.
Well said. What an enjoyable conversation. I greatly appreciate you coming on the Crit House and talking about your 5 images. To you out there watching, if you're interested in participating in the Crit House, we'd love to have you on. Take your 5 images, post them up on Instagram, and use the hashtag MyFIVE, and then tag us at the Crit House. And perhaps we'll have you on and have a conversation like we have with David duChemin. David, thank you so much. Great talking to you.
Thank you. Really
thank you all for watching the Crit House.